Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I direct my question to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that the...
Just before you do, I think the Prime Minister has a comment on ministerial arrangements too.
Okay.
I inform the House that the Minister for Administrative Services, Frank Walker's absence from question time today. The Minister for Finance will answer questions on behalf of Mr Walker.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is directed to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that the only thing which will help stock farmers in Australia when this drought is over will be the number of sheep and cattle individual farmers manage to save? While you didn't address this matter in your statement yesterday, your government must have given it great thought over the last few tragic months of the drought. Will the Prime Minister indicate to the House and the rural community his analysis of the current national inventory of existing stock feeds available for purchase? What is his advice as to that position if the drought continues until Christmas?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
This is an attempt by the Leader of the Opposition to try and drag out a policy which has now been massively discredited by the farm community. When the National Party, I mean, you don't realise how much on the nose the National Party is out there. When you go around the farm community, you are held in utter and complete contempt. Utter and complete contempt. The National Party is held in utter and complete contempt. Now, Mr Speaker, this is what farm leaders had to say about the National Party and the opposition's policy on fodders. This is from first of all, the director of the National Farmers Federation, policy director. I think the farmers certainly wouldn't have a widespread fodder subsidy as their top priority. And he went on to say, well, it's a bit disappointing in that the farm organisations collectively haven't been involved in the formulation of this policy. I think that's evident in the priorities not being lined up with what industry sees as being most important. No, there's better ones. Let me just go on. It says, the National Farmers Federation, it goes on to say, said that in 1982 a lot of benefit didn't go to the sufferers of the drought, it went to people selling fodder. The Cattlemen's Union's president, John Purcell, said he had concerns over the possible market distortions with such a scheme could cause. We prefer to see a well-controlled concessional loan scheme. Let me just repeat that for you. We would prefer to see a well-controlled concessional loan scheme rather than a subsidised fodder scheme because it removes the concern over possible distortions of the market. There are people around who would abuse a subsidised fodder scheme, so it has to be well controlled. I mean, you're not doing too well at this point, are you? And then it goes on, and let me quote Mr McGeechy from the National Farmers Federation. The fodder subsidy schemes in the past have not been effective in terms of using the money most effectively and targeting those people who need the assistance most. Under the provisions that exist, if the rules are applied properly, you can target the assistance to people who need it. Now, Mr Speaker, and it goes on, there's one quote after another. Mr Bonanno in Queensland said, I think the coalition, their priorities might be the wrong way round. And it goes on in those terms. Mr Speaker.
Just a moment till you get the call. The Prime Minister might just resume his seat for a moment. The Leader of the National Party.
Mr Speaker, understanding Order 145, the question was in relation to the inventory of existing stock feeds and the prospects in relation to that between now and Christmas. It was a fair question. I'd ask that you direct the Prime Minister to answer that question.
The Prime Minister is in fact answering the question. The Prime Minister.
Now, Mr Speaker, the government's taken the view that the people who will know best where to procure their requirements, that's in fodder and in other carry-on support, will be the farmers themselves. And that's, oh yes, I know you'd object to that from the National Party. You don't think the farmers have got any rights. You don't think the farmers have any rights. Yeah.
Member for Parks is not
too much. What was that thing you drank? 2,4-T. You've been drinking. You've been out there having a private swill of 2,4-T again, Mr. 2,4-D, 2,4-5-T.
Order. Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker. And instead of the Leader of the National Party and the Leader of the Coalition having the decency to say what the government did yesterday and extending income support to families, of turning RAS into a demand-driven scheme for exceptional circumstances, for doing those things which then allow and increasing the limits on the subsidies which can actually be paid to farmers to 100,000 within a year and 300,000 in over 5 years. That's the sort of support. That's the sort of support that farmers have asked for, but you've not been listening. You've been trying to push, and you're still trying to push your question about fodder. Now, Mr. Speaker, the farm communities, leaderships, the peak organisations, the National Farm Federation, the grain growers, the Cattlemen's Union, etc., have a better idea than any one of you will have about what's available for stock feed for farms and how they think their membership may best procure that on terms most acceptable to them. And that's why what we've done here is back in farm families, and what you're trying to do is to back in fodder owners and sellers. And that's the difference. I mean, even in a matter, well, your policy was so utterly discredited. Everywhere I went in the bush in the last couple of weeks, they were bagging you. They were bagging you uphill and down Dale. They were bagging you. You were held in utter derision. In utter derision. You were held with utter contempt. In utter contempt. So, I mean, you absolutely hate it when the Labor Party, as it always has to do, comes to the rescue of the Australian farm community. You sort of wince on it. You just can't stand it. You know, little niggardly little press statements, nasty little comments on radio. Instead of getting above it all and looking at the needs of the farm community, you're into that sort of. You can never see the value. You can never see the public value going to a community that needs support. You're basically into nitpicking and trying to run a policy which is so dead and so discredited that every farm leader in the country has bagged it.
The honourable member for Calare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is directed to the Prime Minister, and I refer to the severe drought now being experienced in rural Australia. And I ask the Prime Minister, what are the implications for regional Australia and the farm communities that will flow from the measures which he and his colleague, the Minister for Primary Industries and Energy, announced yesterday?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, the government has had under review now the difficulties which have been occasioned by the prolongation of the drought and its impact on farmers and farms, particularly in exceptional circumstance areas. And as a consequence of that, the government said it would consider an approach to policy to deal with the problems of the drought on a systemic basis. And it's in fact very clearly honoured that promise. Now, Mr. Speaker, I said a couple of weeks ago that we wouldn't leave the farm community, those in trouble, behind, and we've made good on that commitment. Now, Mr. Speaker, the principal elements of the package that was announced yesterday, the 5 major elements are income support, looking after the education of children of farmers in drought, providing additional financial assistance to farmers for carry-on finance and increasing dramatically the limits for maximum levels of assistance, improving the ability of farmers to access RAS without first selling off-farm assets or liquidating legitimate superannuation and other retirement income assets, and the development of incentives for the provision of farm storage and water facilities. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is a very comprehensive package. It costs about $164 million over 2 years, and of course, because it's essentially demand-driven, if the drought is exceptional circumstance areas are extended, then it will end up costing the budget more than the announcement of yesterday. The change to income support is what is being sought by many farm families, and that is where they haven't an income from their farm to get a payment, though they were unable to get the payment because of the assets test on the job search allowance. That is, the payment which is made under the job search allowance was incapable of being paid when the assets test would have debarred many farmers who had substantial assets but no income. So a new payment, the drought relief payment, will provide farm families with sufficient cash for basic necessities and services. Payments will be made to farm families in exceptional drought-declared areas, will not be subject to the assets test, but will be subject to the JSA income and off-farm assets test. Now, Mr Speaker, one of the great concerns, I think, in this episode of the drought is it is putting at risk the whole notion of the continuation of family farms and rural society, with people leaving farms and certainly their children not taking up farming and keeping them on their farm, giving them income support, and then with the second measure, which is the farm finance, will mean that they've got the chance to stay on their farm and carry on. The other concern, Mr Speaker, that farmers expressed to me and Senator Collins and other ministers has been that children have, because of financial necessity, needed to be withdrawn from schools. So yesterday, to overcome this problem, to assist here, the existing Austudy farm assets test will be removed. So the farm assets test will be removed for all families in exceptional drought areas. The current Austudy income test happens to be more generous than the Job Start Allowance income test, and that's the one that will apply. That is, the Austudy income test will apply. So the Austudy income test applies, but not the assets test. And that will mean that many children of farm families will be able to remain in schools and in secondary education. On farm finance, Mr Speaker, as I said a few moments ago, the changes to the Rural Adjustment Scheme will be demand-driven. At the moment it's cash limited, and even though somebody may actually succeed in an application for support, they are often not fully paid because the scheme doesn't have enough money in it. We've now topped that up to make it demand-driven, so eligible people will now get the full amount due to them, up to 100% interest subsidy for viable farms. And this will mean, with 100% interest subsidy, farmers can make the decision whether they want to go on and put in another crop, or help them to manage the debt that they've picked up in the meantime. I mentioned a moment ago, Mr Speaker, that we've increased the limits under that farm finance RAS assistance from 50,000 maximum annual assistance to 100, and the cumulative limit we're lifting from 100,000 to 300,000. So that would roughly mean that it could handle $1 million to $3 million worth of debt under that arrangement. Now, over that period, Mr Speaker, as well as that, we're excluding bona fide retirement assets. Many farmers have bought themselves a house in town or a house on the coast, so when their children take over management of the farm, they've got somewhere to go and to live. Under the existing RAS arrangements, they had to sell those properties before they could receive RAS support. We're excluding bona fide retirement assets and off-farm assets of that nature from the RAS assets test, and that will make a tremendous difference in qualification, or the capacity to qualify. And to help farmers in the recovery phase, we're extending these arrangements 6 months beyond the end of the declaration of exceptional circumstances. So, Mr Speaker, and as well as that, we're looking at the development of a set of incentives for the provision of farm storage and water facilities, looking at a generous investment allowance and possibly faster depreciation, but we want to work this out with the peak farm bodies. So, Mr Speaker, as a package, it comes to all of these, as I said, these 5 things: income support, looking after the education of children of farmers in the drought, providing additional financial assistance to farms for carry-on finance, increasing dramatically the limits for maximum levels of assistance, improving the ability of farmers to access RAS without first selling off-farm and retirement income assets, and developing an incentive for the provision of farm storage and water facilities. All those things, I think, Mr Speaker, add up to a very large change in public policy, which has been adopted by the government for the support of the farm communities. And, Mr Speaker, instead of the coalition cavilling at all of these changes, they should have been supporting them, rather than the first question the Leader of the Opposition today up about his fodder subsidy. Mr Speaker, I hope that this will really be of material assistance to Australian farmers and Australian farm families, and as a consequence they and their peak bodies will believe that their consultations with the government have been real and worthwhile.
The honourable member for Grey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is directed to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, Prime Minister, you announced a drought package aimed at drought-stricken farmers in Queensland and northern New South Wales. Prime Minister, you would be aware that South Australia is also experiencing one of the driest years on record, which follows on from 2 years of rain damage, mouse plague and frost. With this in mind, what assurance can you, Prime Minister, give to South Australian farming families the federal government's drought package will be extended to South Australia?
Honourable the Prime Minister.
The principle behind the package is the principles which have been articulated to us by peak farm leadership groups over time. That is, that we have in place the 1992 drought policy, which my colleague Simon Crean negotiated and put into place, but with the exceptional circumstances we have found, with droughted areas being consistently droughted for 3 and 4 years in a row, there needed to be a policy that dealt with the exceptional circumstances that happen to apply here. Now, South Australia, if certain shires are declared to be exceptional circumstance drought areas, they would qualify for this assistance. Were it not to be, they will come under the normal provisions of the 1992 drought policy. So the policy is there for farmers in South Australia, and it would be there in the event that the drought and the circumstances which see certain shires declared as exceptional areas, that would be there as well. Now, Mr Speaker, I noticed the Adelaide Advertiser today, and a very paltry headline, but we come to expect them from that newspaper, Mr Speaker, failed to communicate to the farm community, the strength of the policy changes adopted yesterday, and to indicate that they would be available to the South Australian farm community in the event that the drought conditions were to be similar to those which apply in parts of New South Wales and in Queensland. Now, Mr Speaker, I hope that this policy change will receive additional treatment in newspapers in the next couple of days, so at least people in the countryside can understand what the policy changes actually mean.
Honourable member for Capricorn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is directed to the Treasurer. In view of the severe effect of the drought on large parts of Australia, can the Treasurer advise the House what impact it will have on the overall economy? Does the government still expect the economy to grow at 4.5% this year?
The Honourable the Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for a question. Well, of course, the drought is clearly a matter of enormous importance and severity for the people who are directly affected, but it has, of course, a wider effect on the whole economy. And, of course, the significance of the drought is such that we're now seeing quite significant impact on the whole of the rural sector in terms of their overall performance. Farm incomes are now forecast by the Australian Bureau of Agriculture and Resource Economics to fall by about 27% this year, with gross farm product down 16% and net farm product down 28%. And the grain crops in particular are very severely affected, wheat production to fall by 38% and barley by 50%. Now, of course, with effects like that in the rural sector, the overall economy has to be impacted as well. And of course, when we put the budget together, we had, of course, made some allowance for the drought, but in the months since it's become much more severe, and therefore the impact on the overall economy has to be altered. Now, we see that the effect calculated by the Bureau of Agricultural and Resource Economics is that the overall effect now of the drought will be to reduce gross domestic product by about 0.5 of 1%. That half of 1% effect means that's on top of the effects that we had built into the budget, so that we're looking at a significant impact on economic growth this year, but still, of course, having started at 4.5%, having substantial underlying growth. That is the direct effect. On top of that, of course, we must expect secondary effects because farmers who have less income spend less. Therefore, there's a flow-on effect to other people in affected areas, and so one has an impact which is accentuated in that way. Of course, the package that the Prime Minister has just announced yesterday and expanded on today is going to cushion that effect to some extent. But we'll also be cushioned in terms of the effect on the overall economy by other developments since the budget, and in particular by what's happening in the world economy. If I might just take the time of the House for a moment to mention some aspects of that. Particularly we're looking at economies like the United States having marked up its growth for 94 considerably from earlier this year, from 3% to 4%. Japan has marked its growth up slightly and much more significantly for 95. And Germany, which originally expected this year growth of less than 1%, is now expecting almost 2% and 2.5% next year. So for the overall OECD, growth is expected to be 0.5% higher than originally expected for this year and much higher in 1995. The overall effect of that for us is to push up our commodity prices, and ABARE now forecast the total international commodity prices will rise by 5% in 94-5, and the price of our rural commodities will go up by 11%. And this will give us, despite the drought, according to ABARE's predictions, a record level of rural exports of $19.1 billion. So I emphasise, despite the drought, a record level of rural exports, and of course a major factor in that certainly true, and a major factor in that is that wool prices are higher, 30% higher than last year on the forecast, and giving us therefore that record outcome. Other commodity prices, of course, the minerals are also expected to be higher. So overall, Mr Speaker, we are seeing this as an offsetting factor of some considerable significance, and the overall effect of the impact of the drought dragging growth down and the international recovery lifting growth up is expected to be that we will see growth for this year not at 4.5% but about 4.25%, so roughly 0.25% of GDP decline. That's not an official forecast at this stage, but it's ABARE's forecast of 4.3%, and I think the view of the government at this stage would be that that's pretty right. So despite the impact of the drought, we can see that the economy is fairly well cushioned from the overall effects, although there will be some impact of the order that I've mentioned. And of course, for underlying features like employment, we are seeing already stronger growth than was forecast in the budget. There's no reason to expect that we will not do much better than the budget forecast on unemployment. We're already at the 9.5% rate that was forecast in the budget, and so by the end of this financial year we can expect to be well below that level. Mr Speaker, severe as the drought is and important as it is for the rural sector, the overall impact on the economy is not going to be too severe as we see it at this stage.
Honourable Member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, although I had a chat to the PM, he was quite happy about the question, in fact. Industry Minister Senator Cook was recently quoted in the Financial Review.
Order. Member for Wills has the call.
Right, Prime Minister. Industry Minister Senator Cook was recently quoted in the Financial Review as saying your government might offer tariff concessions on TCF imports in return for special market access for Australian exports. If the paper The Rebirth of Australian Industry, as cited by Tim Colbatch in today's Age, is correct in arguing that sectoral policies, not tariff cuts, were responsible for the alleged rebirth of Australian industry, are we to conclude that Senator Cook's version of industry policy, which he described as the next generation of industry policy, is simplistic and will do no more than bring uncertainty to the TCF industry and diminish rather than increase jobs in a significant Australian industry? And finally, if trade-off tariff cuts are now government policy, is it you and the Industry Minister and not the former Leader of the Opposition, Dr Hewson, who should be wearing the Captain Zero tag?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I have not read that article in any detail. I saw the headline on it this morning, but there is no doubt that industry policy in Australia under this government has had two elements to it. One has been to remove the notion that there's a right to easy profits and protection through the tariff barrier and tariff levels, with effective rates of tariff for some industries in the 250% area, and the belief that this was too large a burden to shoulder the Australian consumer with, that there wasn't a decent trade-off in wages and employment for the kind of costs which were imposed upon them, and that in the removing of the tariff wall we would introduce competition and competitive breezes so that our industry was not only competent at import competition, but as well as that, the whole notion would be supportive of the government's anti-inflationary policy. And I think, given the fact that we've seen now a very large change in tariff levels already, and the fact that we have low inflation and maintaining it at that level, that tariffs and the removal of them are no doubt playing a role. But the most important role is the change psychology in industry. And I had, a notable member of one of the industry groups come to me a week or two ago and say, "I'm a member of the 180-degree club." And I said, "Oh, what's that?" He said, "Well, I'm one of those people who thought tariffs were 100% right," and he said, I now think the policy has produced changes I could never have contemplated, with enterprise changes at the workplace, people on the job looking for productivity improvements, changed attitude amongst executives." So he said, "I've turned 180 degrees in favour of the government's policy, and I'd never thought I'd ever say that." Now, that's what I think has changed. What's also helped has been the support the government has given particular sectors, and we've done that where we thought there was an opportunity. You can see it in shipbuilding with the launch of the Anzac frigate this week. You can see it in the submarine, the Collins-class submarine, where the government wanted to see a defence industry created. You can see it with duo-hulled catamaran aluminium ferries and other lighter categories of shipping. You can see it in the computer software area, and these things I think have made a difference. But I don't think you can argue that that's the reason why industry policy has changed. Now, I have a great respect for the person who wrote that article, but he does have a little axe to grind about tariffs and industry policy. And I don't believe that, if you like, an analysis of what has happened in Australia could lead anyone to really conclude that the policy change most telling has not been the sectoral industry assistance plans, but the removal of tariffs. That's been the primary change, and well, it might have been. Now, Mr. Speaker, I was asked further about what trade-offs Australia might give in any removal of barriers elsewhere around the world. Well, we've been principally now through that with the GATT, with the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs and the World Trade Organisation arrangements coming out of the conclusion of the Uruguay round. So that is behind us. And of course Australia's changes, far and away went beyond anything that we might have been required to offer in the round. In APEC we are speaking about a GATT plus set of arrangements, which means that there is some prospect over time that with a declaration of free trade in the Pacific, that we could get to a point where there is a lot more market access for Australian industry. And that may involve certain trade-offs at that point. But I think the other point that needs to be, but that's if ever, a long way off. Now, I actually think this will happen, but it's a long way off. But, Mr. Speaker, what certainly has happened, we've seen now an enhanced investment in the TCF industries. And the exports, the growth in exports of TCF Industries has been really quite profound. And the fact that we're now getting, for the first time in decades, a real sort of, if you like, wave of quite strong investment in the TCF area meant, I think, that the policy has worked. And those industries which the honourable member concerns himself with, and not unreasonably, which went through a fairly substantial period of structural adjustment, particularly in Melbourne, have now stabilised themselves and are growing. And they're finding with their new investments they have more capacity to grow further. So I think success breeds success. So rather than fear any further change, really what we want is a more pro-competitive, pro-trade environment. That's in essence been the government's policy. We're extending that. We extended that in the GATT. We're extending that through into APEC. And were that to be the case, I'm quite sure the Australian consumer would be better off. We would have lower prices, but more volumes, and have an even stronger TCF set of industries in Victoria than we have this very day.
Honourable Member for Lowe.
Mr Speaker, my question with notice is directed to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, I refer to the decision yesterday by the Industrial Relations Commission to grant a pay rise to low-paid workers. Is the decision of the Commission consistent with the government's intention to ensure that all Australians benefit from the economic recovery and consistent with enterprise bargaining principles?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the government welcomes the decision of the Industrial Relations Commission yesterday to grant 3 $8 a week safety net pay rises. The decision is clearly consistent with enterprise bargaining principles, and it's consistent with the continuing low inflationary recovery of the economy. The first $8 is for those workers who have not received a wage increase as a result of enterprise bargaining since November 1991. Now, Mr Speaker, November 1991 is some time away now, yet we've seen an enormous pickup in the economy and a huge pickup in profits. And hence, I mean, it is not only sensible but just that such a wage increase should be agreed. The second is available from today at the enterprise level. It is subject to a number of tests, including that the union has genuinely sought an enterprise agreement and has been unsuccessful. In other words, they've not been able to access the enterprise bargaining stream. The third $8 will be available at the enterprise level from the 22nd of September 1995, and that will be for those without an enterprise bargain. So, Mr Speaker, these are a set, I think, of very just and sensible arrangements in a wage system which has served the country well now for over a decade, and the safety net quality of it is basically this, that if an employee were to have received, say, a $20 a week enterprise bargaining related wage increase, they would be entitled to $4 under the safety net. So, in other words, this arrangement is of its essence the safety net, as the government said, and the minister made clear when the legislation was introduced, and why we think it is the sort of policy that holds the award system as the guarantee of that safety net, holds that together, and at the same time allows for enterprise bargaining to go on. At the same time, Mr Speaker, the Commission has decided it would develop a set of detailed principles by which awards can be reviewed through a pilot award review program, and where necessary awards will be changed to make them easier to understand, easier to adapt to the needs of the enterprise and non-discriminatory. In fact, let me just quote for a second here Justice O'Connor, who said, "We decided to introduce a range of measures to make the award system more flexible so that they are suited to particular needs of the enterprise. These measures will mean the effective use of enterprise flexibility clauses, facilitative provisions and majority clauses. In this process, the enterprise and its needs must be taken into account, as well as consideration of an adequate safety net of award wages and conditions." So, Mr Speaker, there you see the Commission comprehending the general view that the government has put, and where we've seen these affordable increases come through. And they add, I think, about half a percentage point to national accounts-based AWE for the year, and they're already factored into the 1994-95 estimates. I was disappointed that the decision met with opposition from the employer groups. You've got to say to them, what do they want? What do they want? After no wage increase for these people since 1991. I mean, would you deny anyone a wage increase of $8 who've had nothing since November 1991, when you've seen huge profits in the economy, the highest profit share in our history, executive salaries blowing their brains out. Now, National Accounts AWE includes on-costs, but I don't expect you to know that. Now, Mr Speaker, as a consequence of this, I was disappointed that Mr Noakes seems to oppose everything that comes out of the Commission, and we are, after all, looking at the broadest measure of inflation. That's a non-farm GDP deflator in the National Accounts 2 weeks ago at 0.8%. 0.8% for the year. A profit share at record levels. What does he want? And then we had the opposition industrial relations spokesman saying the decision makes a mockery of any suggestion that the awards are not still an all-powerful and makes a mockery of changes last year. That's not true. The awards are there as a safety net, and then the enterprise bargains can then be undertaken on a productivity-related basis. And the thing I'd say to the opposition spokesman is something must be working, because the inflation rate is under 1% on its broadest measure, and between 1 and 2%. Well, how come you had 800,000 people out of work and you had double-digit inflation in 1983 when you were helping Mr Fraser out in his office? You were a great help at the time, obviously. Now, Mr Speaker, this is a good outcome, a very good outcome, a fair outcome, a just one, one that keeps the wage system relevant and working. We are in now our 11th year of an accord. The accord has now met with a substantial acclaim around the world from the OECD, from other bodies, and indeed by a lot of the industry groups in this country. And I think yesterday's decision was a very sound one, and it's really about time the opposition in this country understood that there's got to be a bit of public decency for people on low incomes, and not take this view that that wherever you hear the word wage rise, it's like sort of garlic to a vampire. You don't want to hear about it. Now, the fact is, Mr Speaker, that this was a just outcome, and in the face of the bounty which the economy is providing in terms of the growth of executive salaries and profits. Who could reasonably deny people on these levels of income a top-up wage increase of these dimensions?
Honourable Leader of the National Party.
Speaker, my question without notice is to the Minister for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs relating to my trade portfolio. Does the Minister's concept of Aboriginal self-determination include the Aboriginal people of Coongarra who have expressed a view that a uranium mine should be allowed to proceed at Coongarra in the Northern Territory? Will the Minister support the vote for an end to the absurd and illogical three mines uranium policy at the forthcoming National Conference of the Labor Party? Or in fact, which vote will you support, Minister, with the left or with Aboriginal self-determination relating to your portfolio?
The Honourable Minister for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs.
Well, certainly not. Mr Speaker.
Order.
Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition. The Minister
I think when we're
call.
talking Aboriginal affairs, Mr Downer, you want to be a bit quiet. Huh? I think so. Mr Speaker,
the Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, when this question was asked by the member for Gippsland, almost the same question about 3 weeks ago, I made the point that the member had unmitigated gall to come into this place and ask a question about Aboriginal affairs. But to have a question come from the Leader of the National Party on an issue related to the rights of Aboriginal people, I mean, you ought to hang your head in shame to come into this House.
Order. The Minister might wait for a moment. Those on my left on the front bench will cease interjecting. The Minister has the call. The Minister.
Mr Speaker, coming from a member who, more than any other member of the coalition, has sought to attack and undermine Aboriginal rights, I find that question most extraordinary. Mr Speaker,
Member for Flinders.
If the Leader of the National Party read the Hansard, he would know that an identical question was asked 3 weeks ago, and I stand by the answer I gave 3 weeks ago.
The Honourable... No, Prime Minister, don't involve yourself. The Minister for Perth. The member for Perth has the call. The
Thank you,
Leader of the
Mr.
Opposition is not helping.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question without notice is directed to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. Has the Minister seen reports in some of today's newspapers which suggest that veterans will be encouraged by the government to, and I quote, share housing? Can the Minister comment on these reports, and can the Minister also inform the House what measures are being undertaken to improve access to aged care service for veteran-sponsored facilities?
The Honourable Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for Perth for his question. There are approximately 340,000 veterans that receive some sort of entitlement from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Their average age is approximately 73 years. Of that 340,000, approximately 40% of them are aged over 75. It is envisaged that by the year 2004, almost 70% of them will be aged over 75 years. And interestingly enough, some 30% of all males in this country over the age of 70 are in fact veterans. Now, as a result, obviously the question of access to aged care is a very big issue for the veteran community, as a result of which they have been asking me that there are some problems in terms of them getting appropriate aged care hostel places and nursing home places in certain areas. Now, for instance, the War Widows Guild in Western Australia has $1 million that they want to spend and set up an aged veterans home, I think in Como in Western Australia, but they're unable to do so because there's not sufficient beds allocated to that region. As a result, I've discussed this matter with Dr Carmen Lawrence, and we've agreed to set up a task force of members from both the Department of Veterans Affairs and also the Department of Human Services and Health, which will report back to me and to Carmen Lawrence in February of next year to see if we can't improve their access, given that the demand for aged care services in the veteran community will increase by something like twice the rate of that in the general community. Now, Mr. Speaker, turning to the first part of the question of the honourable member, I have seen reports this morning. I want to assure our veteran community that the government is not encouraging them to reside together, that we are not saying that they should share housing. I think that the appropriate newspapers just got it wrong, quite innocently I would suspect. What we are looking at, though, is that there are a number of people— it was actually— but there are a number of people—
Don't give him a lead. Minister.
Quite an innocent mistake in this case, but there are a number of veterans that say to me that they have a preference for veterans' homes where they can talk about their common experiences and where they can discuss matters and be in a friendly atmosphere with people that are their peers. As a result, they want to be able to get into a place like the RAF Memorial Homes at Bull Creek in Western Australia, where they have independent living. They then go on to hostel accommodation, then to frail aged care, and then into nursing home, all in the one community. And that's what we're talking about. It seems that there is a demand for that sort of thing by the veterans, and that's what I'm specifically asking them to do. So I just want to make that point very clear, because I think it is important and we don't want to frighten any of our veterans. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to particularly thank the honourable member for Perth and the honourable member for Lilley, both who have given me a great deal of support in setting up this task force. And I can say that their interest is very genuine, because in one case his father is a veteran living, and in the other case his father was a TNPI. So I want to thank them, and I hope that this report does come out with something good which will help the veterans.
The honourable member for Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question without notice is the Minister acting for the Minister for Administrative Services. Is the Minister aware that in a recent investigation the Electoral Commission discovered in a political party's electoral funding return two discrepancies, one for 3 cents and the other for 38 cents? As the Commission is obviously so thorough, and given the revelations concerning apparent large-scale corruption in the Western Australian branch of the Labor Party, will the Minister now instruct the Electoral Commission to conduct a full inquiry into the misuse of money? And will the Minister also ensure that the investigation includes the role played by the current Federal Minister for Health, who has admitted today on radio that she has knowledge of this matter, and the former State Secretaries who are now in the Federal Parliament?
The Honourable Minister for Finance, representing the Minister for
I think the Electoral
Administrative
Commission
Services.
might have a passing interest in the Liberal Party's fundraising in your electorate.
which is now the subject of constant police investigation, including a couple of your state colleagues. And there will no doubt, as time transpires, there will be a great deal that will intrigue the Electoral Commissioner arising from those inquiries. I'm afraid, old son, when you go down the track, the particular track that you have sought to go down in the last few days, you never know where it's going to end up. And if I were you, I'd think really very carefully about it.
Order.
And I also note, of course, that in the returns that are put in place by the various political parties, that in the course of the last election campaign, the Liberal Party received something like $8 million. More than the Labor Party during the course of the last election campaign. And I also note that you were dragged absolutely kicking and screaming into disclosure legislation in this place, kicking and screaming, and you have still in Western Australia not proclaimed the legislation on declaration of interest. Now, as it happens, the particular member to whom you referred to is a state member. According to in this place, the particular things involve a state member has been put here. There has already been statements put out by the various people who have discussed this that quite clearly indicate the nature of the contribution in that area. If the Electoral Commissioner has an interest in those matters, no doubt he will take that into account, as he is an independent officer of the Commonwealth. No doubt that he'll take those matters into account and will interest himself in the matter, and he is obviously very welcome to do so. But as I said, there will be from time to time a load of things come out of interest to the Electoral Commission on party donations, just to make absolutely certain when you get in this place and sling mud where it's likely to end up.
The honourable member for McEwen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is also to the Minister for Finance.
Order. Member for McEwen.
My question also, Mr Speaker, is to the Minister for Finance. Is the Minister aware of claims that Australia's economic recovery is being held back by uncertainty and a lack of confidence in economic management, particularly the government's management of budget outlays? In light of these claims, is it the intention of the government to alter the budget settings, and if not, why not?
The Honourable Minister for Finance.
Mr Speaker, I'm aware of those claims. They are claims, of course, that emerge from that wonderful document which only we discuss now in this place, the things that matter. You hear nothing from the opposition about their policies in that area, and of course in that they say Labor's policies are creating uncertainty and concern about the future and undermining the confidence needed to invest. So therefore the public has no confidence, according to that document, in the management of the economy by the government and its budget strategy. Therefore it doesn't invest by implication. Well, we have some evidence recently about precisely what the public does think about those various heads under which outlays appear as to whether or not they're better handled by the government or the opposition. And we had the poll the other day, the news poll, which said for the first time in the history of this government that every single area of policy covered by budgetary matters, the government has the confidence of the public as opposed to that of our opponents. We have who's better able to handle budgetary policy related to unemployment. We win 39-28. Health and Medicare 45-26. Environment 34-21. Family issues 39-26. Welfare and social issues 44-23. Interest rates 40-28. Inflation 40-29. Taxation 39-30. Balance of payments 36-32. Women's issues 39-20. Industrial relations 44-26, immigration 34-30, Aboriginal native title issues 40-21. Now, I noticed that the opposition leader's parliamentary secretary said the other day in an article that he also wrote in The Australian, I quote, "It is also untrue to claim that most voters don't know what the Liberal Party stands for." I suppose you've got to say, after looking at a survey like that, he's probably right.
The honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Administrative Services. At the trial last week of former Western Australian Deputy Premier David Parker on charges of stealing donated campaign funds, the President of the Senate and former ALP State Secretary, Senator Behan, stated that the Labor Party had used campaign funds to pay the gambling debts of a Labor candidate. Yesterday, the Western Australian Shadow Attorney-General David Smith, on resigning his shadow portfolio, is reported as saying that it is not true that the party had paid his gambling debts, that in 1991 and 1992 he had borrowed $40,000 from the Labor Party, and that the loan did not come from campaign funds but had been borrowed by the party from a bank. Senator Chris Evans, another former ALP State Secretary, is also reported as saying that the Labor Party had lent money to Mr Smith. In view of the consequence for Mr Parker of using campaign funds for private purposes, and in view of the conflict between the testimony of Senator Behan on the one hand and the statements not under oath of Mr Smith and Senator Evans on the other hand, will the Minister ask the Australian Electoral Commission to investigate the matter in order to determine whether the monies came from campaign funds, from borrowings, or indeed from public funding?
The Honourable Minister for Finance,
a couple of
representing
things
Mr
that I'd make.
Services.
You, above all people in this chamber, know that Mr Parker has been charged with other offences and his situation is sub judice. And you, among all members, ought to know that it is entirely improper to canvass those matters in this place.
Order.
That's the first thing. The second thing is I made exactly the points that you made in answer to the question asked by the previous member. And as far as I know, I can't make the same response to you. As far as I know, the matters of the Liberal Party in your electorate are not under police investigation, unlike the situation in his electorate. But nevertheless, the issues raised in that, of course, go to some extent to how parties are funded. I might point out that if funds are raised for administrative purposes, or funds are secured by party operations for administrative purposes, different issues apply to them. I'm sure if the Electoral Commissioner feels that there is something raised in this area that is a matter for interest to him, he will investigate it, and that is entirely a matter for him.
The Honourable Member for Franklin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. What steps has the government taken to make the legal system fairer, more efficient and more effective? In addition, what steps are being taken to increase access to justice for all Australians and their ability to protect their rights? What alternative approaches have been suggested?
The Honourable Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Members will be aware of a great deal of effort which is going on in the Australian community in terms of the question of access to justice. Clearly, these are important matters, and in May we had the report of the Access to Justice Advisory Committee. 110 submissions have been received in relation to that, particularly in relation to that matter. And then in August there was a forum in this chamber at which a range of people spoke, including the Prime Minister. I suppose that there are two streams to be considered in this broad issue. One, questions of obtaining access to our courts and exercising one's rights through there. And of course the second stream is the state of the substantive law itself and how adequately that actually provides for people's rights. And of course very keen to further considerations of these issues, and knowing that the font of all wisdom, of course, doesn't always rest with the government. I have looked for alternative approaches. The first one I went to, of course, and hoping to get some guidance from, was the things that matter statement. I'm sure members will recall that. If one dredges back in the back of one's memory, one might recall that particular document. Unfortunately, obviously in this area things didn't matter too much because it had very little to say whatsoever on the question of law and justice. So I did make some interesting statements about commitments to individual rights and individual individual freedoms. So I went a bit further afield to try to find some guidance on this matter, and then discovered the Liberal Party platform, in fact. Now, this is a document of which I know members would be very familiar, and it does, in fact, have a section on the heading of justice and law reform. And it says, in part, that the rule of law is fundamental to an assurance of justice without discrimination or partiality. This principle protects the individual against arbitrary interference. The Liberal Party believes that the Commonwealth should give effect to these principles by, and then goes through some dot points, and one of them being protecting the civil liberties of the individual and society, including the recognition of civil, political and social rights according to international conventions adopted by Australia. Now, that's not something which you find actually...
You heard that, did you? You're not going to oppose it.
Well, it's in the Liberal Party platform, and I'm now delighted to understand that the Shadow Cabinet has actually put their minds to this matter and has decided not to support measures in this matter, not to support them, but not to oppose them. It's a nice little nuance of opinion there. But the question, the Prime Minister mentions the question of strong leadership, and it's good to see that the Leader of the Opposition is obviously attempting to assert some control in terms of the Shadow Cabinet. But apparently the issue then has to go to the party room, to the Liberal and National Party party rooms, and it now. It seems, I understand that the debate is continuing, at least the last report that I had is when question time ended at 3 o'clock, and maybe I'm behind the times of this thing, but the debate wasn't resolved, and it's not surprising that the debate's not resolved, because we've seen the Liberal Party, of course, have more positions on this issue than are illegal under the Tasmanian Criminal Code, Mr. Speaker. But first we had outright rejection whatsoever on the basis of states' rights, and that was the original position from the opposition. And then that changed by the issuing of a press release saying there's going to be these 4 principles in which we would judge any mechanisms against and tick them off and see whether they offended these principles. And then we had statements to the Tasmanian branch of the Liberal Party, and particularly to the Premier of Tasmania, indicating very strong support for our colleagues in Tasmania and those laws which those advocate. But now apparently some sort of reason has come in. Maybe the Chamber of Commerce got to him and told him to change his view. Maybe he came across a corroboree and decided to change his view on that. Who knows what led to it, but at least we are delighted that even if there's not going to be support, there's not going to be opposition. Well, these are fundamental issues, of course, for this Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and we'll be interested to see how the party room behaves. We'll be interested to see how the National Party responds to us in relation to their position, and how all these various segments of views which try to coalesce in one party actually draw themselves together. You can't be serious about a system of justice and fairness unless you are able to address these points and put behind you the view that governments have rights. It is individuals that have rights, and the Liberal Party should understand on it, not simply things, and absolutely support these measures and not be mealy-mouthed and say they're not going to oppose them.
The honourable member for O'Connor. Order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question to the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be aware of federal legislation relating to public funding of political parties and the need for the utmost propriety in the expenditure of such taxpayer-provided funds. This week, Prime Minister, you advised your caucus of your concerns relating to the corrupt practices in the WA branch of the Labor Party. As a member of federal executive, will you, this weekend, recommend the use of the ALP federal powers of intervention to conduct a full inquiry to root out all those who have been involved or endorsed these corrupt practices?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I made no such reference in the Labor caucus, none whatsoever.
The member for O'Connor will resume
I'm
his
denying
seat.
it now. And,
Your seat.
And Mr. Speaker, And, Mr Speaker, the reference I made was
Not interject.
to the standing of the Labor Party in the state of Western Australia as a whole. That is the federal and state Labor Party. And Mr Speaker, I didn't refer to corruption at all. Exactly. At all. Well, I could have referred to the fact that at one stage, most of the Queensland cabinet was in the Boggo Road Gaol. I could have referred to the fact that Tom Burns wanted to be the leader of the chain gang, and he wanted to see them in sort of chained up along the street, you know. Don Lane, Shady Lane, jailed. Brian Austin, jailed. Leisha Harvey, jailed. The New South Wales Minister, Terry Mesrel, on tax evasion and sacked. Tim Moore on corruption and appointing Mesrel to a government job. Matt Singleton from the National Party, who had an undisclosed interest in a development when he made representations on the developer's behalf and sacked from the ministry. Phil Smiles, the Assistant Treasurer, who had tax breaches and sacks. Wal Murray, who had created a climate of corruption, according to the ICAC in New South Wales, in North Coast land developments. Ian Causley from the National Party, who created a climate of corruption on the North Coast land development. Tony Packard, who had illegal use of listening devices and had to resign. I mean, you know all about it over there, don't you? You are the specialist. You wrote the real book. And only for one very friendly juror we would have had Joe behind bars for his role in running the most corrupt state in the history of the Commonwealth. So, Mr Speaker, before the Liberals Party starts up talking about corruption in state governments, they ought to look at the National Party in Queensland, New South Wales and all those people in the great tradition of the coalition parties who have either had to resign their position or spent some time at Her Majesty's pleasure.
The honourable member for Coronella.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question without notice is to the Minister for Consumer Affairs, and it relates to her answer yesterday concerning complaints by consumers.
The member for Coronella will wait for a moment. Those on my left will cease interjecting. Member for Coronella.
I'll start again, Mr Speaker. My question without notice is to the Minister for Consumer Affairs, and it relates to her answer yesterday concerning complaints by consumers. Third time lucky. My question is to the Minister for Consumer Affairs, and it relates to her answer yesterday.
The member for O'Connor.
Concerning complaints.
Yeah, just hang on a bit. From time to time in this place in question time, at that end of the chamber, there is a constant barrage between those on my right and those on the front bench on my left. Might I suggest that you just refrain? Otherwise, I'll take appropriate action. Coronella.
Once again, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question without notice is to the Minister for Consumer Affairs, and it relates to her answer yesterday concerning complaints by consumers about the lack of decent dispute settling systems in the home building industry. Have Victorian consumers drawn her attention to a report on this issue as it affects them, which has just been completed by the Victorian Parliamentary Public Accounts and Estimates Committee? Does this report severely criticise the operations of the Victorian Housing Guarantee Fund, and especially its failure to look after home builders' interests? Can she advise honourable members what action she can take in the interests of home builders to deal with the problems revealed by this report?
The Honourable Minister for Consumer Affairs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member. Yes, I did answer a question yesterday in relation to the problems faced by consumers with the home building industry, and I mentioned the TPC report last year, which recommended that the states do something to solve this problem.
Bendigo.
We now have, Mr Speaker, a report just tabled in the Victorian Parliament by their Public Accounts and Estimates Committee, which shows that in Victoria consumers are really up against it. The report by this Victorian Parliamentary Committee shows that the Victorian Housing Guarantee Fund, which is set up to guarantee domestic building work, is inadequately supervised, has an inadequate system of settling disputes, fails to provide sufficient information to consumers about the competency of builders. And, Mr Speaker, I'll give just one example of the problem. The committee found in one case that a kitchen building company failed to register probably more than 750 contracts with the fund, which breaches the Housing Contracts Guarantee Act, was allowed to back-register more than 600 contracts without payment of registration fees, and was not prosecuted by the Victorian Office of Fair Trading and Business Affairs, who believed that a warning was probably appropriate. The committee, this Victorian Parliamentary Committee, Mr Speaker, found quite properly that the Office of Fair Trading should act immediately in these matters. The committee made some strong recommendations to the Kennett government to establish an independent building disputes tribunal, which is exactly what the TPC has recommended, to increase the monitoring of the Housing Guarantee Fund, and to abolish compulsory arbitration clauses, the cause of so many of the problems, to provide plain English contracts, and many more recommendations. Now, Mr Speaker, the Victorian Law Reform Commission had been well on the way to developing just the sort of answers to these problems, a uniform fair trading contract for home builders, which would have solved these problems. But the Kennett government has abolished the Victorian Law Reform Commission. So, of course, now we don't know where we stand on this issue. Mr Speaker, yesterday I did recommend that states follow this through, that when the next Ministerial Council of Consumer Affairs meets, the states report that they have done something in this area for Australian consumers. And I certainly hope that this report by the Victorian Parliament will get some action going in that state.
Prime Minister. I ask for further questions to be placed on the notice paper.
The honourable member for Moore.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I move that so much of the standing and sessional orders be suspended